Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I wanted to show you the latest addition to my J.M. Barrie collection that came in the mail today. And this is a Folio Society edition of Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens that they produced in 2006. And I knew it was out there, but I'd never really taken a close look at it until I saw a good price on it and decided to order it and just enjoy it. Because, to be honest, I don't really own any great editions of Peter Pan. I am attracted to the older J.M. Barrie editions, but of course, his works featuring Peter Pan are the most expensive, and so I've avoided those. And I thought it would be nice to add a nice and fairly inexpensive reprint of Peter Pan to my collection. And so I came across this. And so Peter Pan in Kensington Garden is a book published for children, but it doesn't contain any new text. Rather, it contains the chapters, the text from his earlier novel, The Little White Bird, that was geared towards adults, where he introduces the character of Peter Pan. And this great folio edition from 2006 actually reproduces the illustrations of Arthur Rackham, who did some wonderful illustrations for an edition of Peter Pan in Kensington Garden that came out initially in 1906, I believe, and a second edition of the work was printed in 1912 with additional illustrations. And according to the introduction of this folio edition, they are reproducing all the illustrations from the 1912 edition here. And so we've got this beautiful green cloth, and I do believe this cover is a reproduction of what it would have looked like in 1912. Nice spine here. And of course we have the box case to store it in that the Folio Society does for all their books, I believe. And so on the end papers here, we have this lovely illustration. And we have the half title here, and then we have the title page with the first of our illustrations looking very undancy indeed. And the illustrations are pasted into the book rather than printed directly onto the paper themselves, which is certainly an older style of producing illustrations for books. We've got this great title page here. This would appear to be Peter Pan. Up in the top of that border, we have some fairies and all sorts of interesting creatures down below here. So The Little White Bird, or Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens, is where the character of Peter Pan made his first appearance, and it's a somewhat darker version of Peter than we see in the pop culture version of Peter Pan, but also in the play and the novel titled Peter Pan and Wendy. That J.M. Barrie wrote later. In Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens, Peter Pan is in fact a baby, and it's his origin story. And this is just a delightful book because of all the illustrations. So yeah, here we go on the copyright page here. Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens was first published by Hodder and Stoughton in 1906 and was illustrated with color plates by Arthur Rackham. A new edition was published in 1912, also by Hodder and Stoughton, containing additional black and white drawings by Rackham. This edition follows the text of the 1912 edition with minor emendations. And this is the third printing by the Folio Society in 2006. Dedicated to Sylvia and Arthur Llewellyn Davies and their boys. So those, of course, are the real-life boys, the real-life children that J.M. Barrie based the eventual characters of Peter Pan and Wendy on. And if you've been following my channel for a while, you'll know that I'm interested not only in the books of J.M. Barrie, but also a specific illustrator, Hugh Thompson, who did illustrations for some of his other works. So not Peter Pan, but beautiful illustrated editions of Quality Street and of the Admiral Crichton. And so this is sort of a new realm for me, looking at this particular illustrator. And it's quite a large book. This is definitely a lot larger than I expected when I ordered it. Somewhat larger than other Folio Society editions I own. But I'm sort of happy that it's large, just because it does make the illustration so much more impactful. And let's page through here to find some illustrations. So first up here we have one of the black and white illustrations, some children playing in Kensington Gardens. We have our map of Peter Pan's Kensington Gardens. And I notice at the head of the chapters we have these creatures. I'm not sure whether it's meant to be a fairy or some other creature in the garden. Because the lore of Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens really is this idea that he was a baby who flew out his nursery window and ended up in Kensington Gardens, back with the birds. And here we go, we have a beautiful illustration here. There is almost nothing that has such a keen sense of fun as a fallen leaf. And we have what appears to be some fairies or nymphs of some sort playing in the autumn leaves, and how perfect, especially as it's autumn now. So Peter Pan flew out his nursery window because he forgot he was no longer a bird. There is this mythical element to this particular work that suggests that all children were once birds, and children who go missing often because they have forgotten that they were no longer a bird and they flew away. And of course the birds start laughing at him, or afraid, or quite bewildered, until a wise old crow lets him know that he is in fact a boy, and he's quite bewildered. He doesn't know what to do. And by the time Peter makes up his mind that he will indeed go home, his mother has moved on and has another baby in his place, condemning him to spend his life as a lost boy, as a boy who never grows up. And he is, of course, on the lookout for other lost children. And this particular illustration here is just lovely. We have fairies on the lake. The Serpentine is a lovely lake, and there is a drowned forest at the bottom of it. And in Peter Pan in Kensington Gardens, we have a brother and a sister. The brother thinks he is playing something of a joke on his sister by letting her be left behind in the gardens when they lock up for the night, where she, of course, meets Peter Pan and is protected by him, and almost falls prey to the fairies, but because of her good service to a fairy and her good service to Peter, she is spared. And here we have Peter perched on a tree limb, cold at night, not sure exactly what to do or how to get home to his mother. Some more fairies. The fairies have their tiffs with the birds. So we've got birds, we've got fairies, all together quite lovely. And this is my favorite in the entire volume, I think. So we have Peter sitting in the tree conversing with old Solomon Caw, who is the crow. I can't remember whether it's a crow or a raven, actually, but old Solomon Caw is the bird who gives him some sage wisdom and eventually assists him in trying to get back to his nursery window. And I almost like Peter Pan in this story better than I do in Peter Pan and Wendy. And it's interesting too because there are some lines and a particular scene where a young girl is offering Peter a kiss and a thimble that actually makes its way into Peter Pan, the play. And so the birds are offering to show him how birds fly a kite. We have another wonderful fairy at the end of the chapter here. And I'll just wrap this up by showing you one more illustration here. Absolutely lovely. I'm very glad to be adding this to my collection. And if you're at all a fan of Peter Pan, this is definitely an interesting volume to be adding to your collection.